Hello and welcome to lesson 1 of week 13. This week brings us to the end of part 2 of this course, and in this lesson we're going to look at how to use environment files to make our system production ready. My name is Mildred. In our last lesson we created our project directory. We looked at what we needed to install. We pipped install everything we needed to install. We have sensitive information within our code, and what we want to do is to be able to separate all of the sensitive information, all of the things that manages configuration out of our code. We want them in a text file, and we want to be able to enable systematic approach to managing configurations in different settings, whether in development, in testing, or in production. And also it's best for security and scalability. So we're going to look at how to do all of these in this lesson. So when we talk about env files, they are environment files. We by convention name them .env, and we store things like configuration settings, when we have API keys, database credentials, all configuration information. We also let the system know what environment we are in, and so that whatever we use for our local environment will be different if we need to set the settings different for our production environment. Maybe production will have a different database name, a different database password, different API keys, and things like that. And then these files are always included in the git ignore files, where you don't push them to GitHub, and on your production server you have a copy of that file, or a place where that file is located in production, and where these information are extracted by a particular library in Python that we're going to discuss. So the first step is for us to come to this place, make sure our environment is activated. If it's not activated, you activate your environment. Refer to week 11 lessons to see how to activate your virtual environment. If you don't have a virtual environment, you have to create one. Make sure that all your installations are not global in your system, but they are within that environment for your project. So at the root of the project file, which is our maternity record file, we want to create a new file. We want to name this .env. This file is going to hold all of the things we want. Let's say we want to define these things. Anything we are defining, they are like constants, right? And we want to define them with uppercase letter. We want to define, and the environment is equal to, they are like name value pairs. What is the value for this? We want to define something called, you can give it any name you wish, just remember the names that you name the different sensitive information. If you have API keys, you want to put API keys like this, equal to. So if you don't have API keys, you don't need to put that there. So let's say we have database name. There's what I want to do. There are different methods of doing this. Some people can have 2 env files, one for local, one for production. I want to have one file, and I want to have a settings file that we use to do the logic of knowing which environment we are in and which variables to use for that environment. So I'm going to do database name local, and I'm going to do something like database name production. Now remember that you don't have to do it this way, you just need to understand how to do it and do it the way you want to do it. Just make sure that the names you give them are names that are meaningful for you to know what value that they hold. So I want database name production. Let's say I want database port. So these are the variables we used last week. So port local, and let's say port production, and let's say we want user local and user production. We also want host. Let's say database host for local and database host production. We also want to have, some people have the local environment, they have a test environment, and they have a production environment. Now depending on how you do your setup, you can even have as many environment files for different settings. And for people who use bash shell, we can actually automate this thing where we both the connection to GitHub, the checking of these environment files, people that use GitHub Actions, we can write different scripts to do this, but that is in an advanced course. In this course we're just going to look at how to create an app that is production ready without putting in too many languages or too many skills to learn in one course. So we have database password local and database password production, and then let's put in the app file we have this secret key. Let's put it here. Let's say secret key like this here. If you are creating an app that the system send out emails, activation email, you can put the email and password here also. So these are environment files that will be included in your git ignore file. So let's set the environment. for now we want the environment to be local, because we are not going to do the production on yet. But the only thing we will change when we go to production is to change environment from local to production. So here, database name local, we have maternity records, and production, let's just give it the same name. Then local, we have the port is 3306. Let's assume production has the same value, but in real life we realize that it will not be the same value, especially when passwords are concerned. So you need to make sure you separate your local env file from production, or you put the name so that you can actually create a logic to know when you're in the local environment, use these constants or use these variables, and when you are in the production environment, use the other ones. So the user is going to be root, I think. We don't even have database host, it's local host. Let's put it here, database host production, let's put it as local host. Then we have database user. Okay, we have the host here already, I didn't even see that. User, let's make it both our user root. The password, let me just put cos123, and the password cos123, and the secret key, let me just write some secret key 123. So secret key will be more secured, and we know what this is used for. It's used to protect our keys. Okay, so when you create your env file like this, it has to be in the root of your application. Here I put it in the models file. Make sure it is in the root, not in the model. So I'll take it out of the models and bring it to the root here. So always make sure that when you expand your file here, you can find the env and the app file like in the same directory or at the root. You always want to leave it at the root of the application like this. Okay, so I've moved it to the root where it's supposed to be. Look at the variables I've set in my .env file. There are many variables you can set depending on what you have. If you have AWS credentials to save so that you can log into AWS, this is where you put all of those stuff here. But we're not going to do it like that here until we get to production deployment. We want to create a new file called the settings file, and we'll also do this in the root of our application. So I'm going to put settings.py like this. Oh, I'll have to rename it. And in this file, what I want to do is to import first of all, let me import the module for environment variables, which is OS. So I'll say import OS. And then I also want to import the functions from a particular library we're going to use, which is .env library. And because we are going to be using python.env library, and what we use Python env to do is to load this information or to read this information from the env file. So we'll come here and say pip install python.env like this. So to say module error, sorry, let me clear and put it properly. I'll get the interpreter pip install python.env. So we have no module pip here, so let me exit, deactivate and reactivate. Let's reactivate python 3 m I'm reactivating venv/bin/activate, and then let's say pip install python.env. So we still have the same problems. Now when you begin to have problem like this, the first thing you want to do is just delete your virtual environment and recreate this environment. Now I'm going to just come here and delete, which means that I am going to reinstall. Now our next lesson after this is for us to discuss managing packages with Poetry, and when we use Poetry, we want to see how we can install packages without having to pip install all the time. So what we will do right now is to combine that lesson with this and skip to that lesson and come back to continue this lesson, because this is the best time for me to illustrate managing packages with Poetry. Poetry is a tool for dependency management and packaging in Python. Now when we use Poetry, we can declare libraries that our project depends on, and it will install and update them when necessary. When we use Poetry also, we have something we call a lock file that will ensure that the installs can be repeated and projects can be built for distribution. And when we install Poetry, there is a particular library, there's a particular file that will be installed along, or that will be created along, and that file is called the pyproject.toml file, and it's a very important file. So let's delete this environment and let's recreate one. So I'm going to recreate a virtual environment, and I'm going to come python 3 venv.venv. Then I'll put venv/bin/activate. Now we want to install both Flask, we want to install SQLAlchehmy, we want to install PyMySQL we want to install everything we've installed before. Okay, so before we do that, let's pip install Poetry and let's use that. So when your virtual environment is deleted, you do not have all of those stuff anymore apart from Python installation. So everything we had before, flags and the rest, we don't have them anymore, and we begin to have all of these wriggly yellow lines saying that these modules are not installed. I don't want us to pip install that. I want us to use this as an illustration to our next lesson, which is managing our packages with Poetry. So we're only going to pip install one thing, which is going to be the Poetry that we want to use. So we'll come here and say pip install, and we install Poetry within like, and we have Poetry installed. Always make sure your environment is activated. I can't stress this enough. Once you have a virtual environment, always activate your environment. Make sure everything is in your environment so there will be no package conflict across your system. So now pip can be upgraded, pip install, upgrade, and everything is successful. So now we have Poetry installed. We can now move on to using Poetry to manage our package. So we want to initialize the project as a Poetry project. Just like we did for Git, it's going to be Poetry init, like this. This will ask you a series of questions that you need to answer for it to configure or create your PyProjects.toml file, which is going to be the most important file here, where you list your dependencies and everything that you want to install during installation of dependencies, deployment of package. We're only going to talk about how to install dependencies. We're not going to talk about how to package and how to deploy all of those things. We're going to just look at that. If we have time towards the last week of the course, we might look at using Poetry to package and all of that. So the package name we want is maternity records. We'll just click enter without typing. We'll leave it as version 0.1.0. Description, you want to say pregnancy registration and maternity information tracking. Anything you want to put here. Then the author is okay. The license, if there's any license. The compatible Python versions. Anything from 3.11 and above. Would you like to define your main dependencies interactively? Just say no. Would you like to define your environment dependencies interactively? Say no. And then, do you confirm generation of file? You say yes. And then this has created a PyProjects.toml file here, which is the important file. Now, later on, we are going to discuss what each of these means. But for now, let us focus on the tool.poetry.name is maternity record, version, the description, the author, and readme file. Then we have the dependencies. It depends on Python 3.11. There are other packages that it depends on that we want to start installing now. So we're not going to be pip installing. We want anybody who clones our project to be able to have all the packages automatically by just running one command on their system. So when they write Poetry run, when they want to get all of the dependencies installed, they'll just put Poetry install and everything will be installed. When you want to update the versions, they'll use Poetry update. I need to do that. Poetry is a lot that we can discuss about Poetry, but we'll keep it simple in this lesson. So now we want to add all our dependencies now. We do not want to do it interactively to just waste time. So what we'll do now is to say the first thing we want to add is flags. So we say Poetry add flag, and to add the most recent version of flags there, and you can see it's added there. We want to add something else. We want to say Poetry add. I'm just adding one after the other just for you to see clearly. So Poetry add, we want to add SQLAlchehmy, and we have it installed. We want to add python.env, so Poetry add python.env. So this is how you add all of the dependencies, everything that it needs. So we also have Poetry add PyMySQL, and it's all installed. So once it's successfully adds, it tells you the version that it added here. So we added the dependencies that we know that we need. We all have them now. You can see that all of this, because it's there, we no longer have the wriggly line because now we have installed those stuff here. So if for any reason you want to install the dependencies only, which is what we want to do, you will type Poetry. So if it's the first time you're in a new virtual environment where you have these files, or you clone this file from the repository, you do Poetry install, and then you use the no root flag for it to install the dependencies only. If there's nothing to install, it will say no dependencies to install or update, installing dependencies from log file. So you can see we have a Poetry.log here. This is the one that makes you to be able to reinstall an installation that you've had before. Okay, when you have a Python file and you want to use Poetry to run, you put Poetry run and then Python and then the name of your script that you want to run. So for detailed description about poetry for a whole course on poetry, you have to attend a live class. When the live class for that topic is scheduled, you will always get an email every week knowing what topics will be discussed during the live web conference. So this is how we use poetry, and this was supposed to be lesson 2, but we've combined it with this lesson so that we can deal with our package management. So now that we've done this, we have all of this. We have our poetry.log, we have the Pi project.toml. This is where we handle all dependencies. We are going to look later at where we will put in the standard or the checks that the code has to go through before the code is accepted. If we use GitHub Actions or if we are pushing to the repositories, the checks that have to go in the standard, how to look at our code, how to standardize our code so that if we're working in team, everybody has the standard code and the standard convention that we're keeping to. Let's go back to our settings file. So we import OS, and we already have all of those dependencies managed by Poetry because we have the python.env that we wanted to install before we saw that our virtual environment needed to be reinstalled. So we import the functions from the .env library. Let's come here and say import, or let's say from, since we don't need everything, we'll say from .env. We want to import load.env. We also want to load the variables from the file, and we do that using the load.env like this. We just call that function. Once we do this, the variables from the .env file are loaded now in this function. So we want to access the values. Let's access the values and print and see that if it's actually reading the value that we have. So let's say we want to store environment into a variable called environ, and environ is equal to os.get. So say os.get env, and then we want to put env, because in this parenthesis what you put here is going to be the name, this name here. So when you are calling them, you call them with this name, get database name local. So we can come here and say db name is equal to os.get env, and then you put in parentheses database name local. So we're just testing to see if he's actually reading, and we want to print environ, and let's print db name. So let's print this to see whether it prints out. We expect to see local, we expect to see maternity records if all is well. So we run, and we have local, we have maternity records, which means it's reading the file. So now that we've done this, we want to actually use the settings file to create a setting so that when we want to change anything here, we only change the env value here from local to production to testing, whatever it is, so that it picks up the values for that environment. And so when we come to settings here, we'll say if, let's get the secret key first, because secret key, let's say secret key is the same for everywhere. So the secret key is equal os.get env, secret key, is that the name? Yeah, secret key. So I will now say if environ, because I want to see if the value stored here is equal to local, I want to do something. I want all the things it gets to be the local ones, like that. I want it to get db user, password, the host, the port, the name, to all used to get the local. So we have here the name local, the port, the host, the username, the password. So everything is the user, the host, the port, everything should get, it should be the local one. And if environment is production, you should get the ones for production. So we have all of these values stored in variables here. So all we do in all our files now is just to import settings, because the settings file holds all of those settings that we want. So we'll go back to our app file now, and we'll begin to modify this file to remove sensitive information, because now we have put all the sensitive information in the env file. We use the settings file to load this information. We're going to import settings to be able to use the variables that hold the information. So you see how we have separated that. This is not going to be pushed to any repository. It will remain on our system. In production, it will remain on the system, and so only the system knows what these values are. And so on GitHub you don't have sensitive information, that is, and on local you don't have production sensitive information. So we have separated all of our configuration out of the code. So we'll come to the app file here, and we want to start removing things that are sensitive, like this secret key. We don't want to hard code it. We want to import settings here, and then we want to say app.secretkey is equal to settings.secretkey. So the settings file we imported dot the name that holds it, which is secret key, the name of the variable. So here we'll come here app.config. So here we are going to plug in those things. So let's use a format string to make it easy. F root at, so we don't want root, we want to just plug in the name, which is settings dot, and in the settings file it is db user, right? Dot db user. Let's see, yeah, we have db user is the user, and the user is db user is root. So say settings.db user, settings.host, and then we have settings.db host, and then we have settings.database. Here you know that we can put user and the password after the column, but because I did not have a password or the port, but because I didn't have that, so you plug that. If you have a password, settings.db password, settings.db port. So remember how to do it. Refer to week 11 to know where to plug those values. So I'm just replacing what I had here before, because my local database doesn't have a password, so I skipped using that. So here is going to be db name, not password. It doesn't have a password, so I skipped using that. The port is the default 3306. You don't have to use it if it's the default port. That's what happened there. So we replace the sensitive information here, and we'll have everything okay. So we have our models file, and I think previously we had created this database, and let's delete it and see if this works. So let's go to localhost /phpMyAdmin. I have the maternity record somewhere. Yes, I have it, and I have these two tables. I want to delete this table completely and see if it is going to run when we run this. So now we want to create a table, the database, and see if the table will be created. So I'll recreate it, maternity record, and let's say create. So now we have the database without any table. We want to come here and run our app file, and if all is well, it should create the tables that we have in the models, which is the user table and the patient table. And so I'll come to the app, I will run, and everything is well. Let's look at the link here. Let's open the link. It says hello world like we wanted. Let's refresh this. We have both tables. So this is how we secure our system. We have our environment files where we have sensitive information. We use Poetry to manage dependencies. So make sure you attend the live web conference for you to go deeper into this topic that we have discussed. Thank you.